Well, I feel optimistic about what I control. I can't vouch for what I will later on not control because at some point in time or the other, I will leave office. Now, the point to make also is that when institutions work, it is really good people who have done their job. And oftentimes, from time to time rather, you cannot eliminate the possibility of one bad person in a position of authority in an institution. What then happens is to ensure that those kind of people, if they accidentally find their ways there, they must leave as quickly as possible. So there are self-corrective measures there. But the point to make also is that the Federal Mortgage Bank on her own cannot fund all of the housing needs of Nigeria. What we need to do is what this administration is doing, leading the way and enabling private sector to come and play its real role. Just like you have public and private transport, you have your cars, people use buses, you have public and private health, you probably use private health care, people use general. It's that mixture that must also come to play in delivering housing. What we can do is to lead the model. And once that is done, I think that ultimately people should be able to then get on with the business of housing.
That takes me right into my next question, because I know, of course, in some of the developed nations, one of the models you see is that banks are very active, private banks are very active in capitalizing and funding with their own kind of housing products. At what point do we get our local banks to get involved in the housing industry in a way that's very, committed?
Inevitably, when the economics of housing is developed, which is my focus, develop a housing economy. Inevitably, when that happens, I think the banks will find their way into it. If you look at the history of banking in Nigeria, there are many sectors that they traditionally were loath to venture into. But if you see what is happening in Agric now, they are beginning to step in, test their feet in the water, and you will hear that from some of the SMEs who are into Agric and agro-processing. As we open up the economy, I believe that the banking sector will also respond. For me, it's important to say two things. First, we must redefine and rediscuss housing. We must not allow people to come to public space in the pursuit of public office to say, I will give you a free house. There's no such thing. We must not allow people to come and make uninformed promises so that as the next election cycle approaches, anybody comes here to say, I'm going to build houses, we must go to the economics of it. Where are you going to raise the money? Where is the money going to come from? How many can you build? Because when I hear 1 million houses, let us just do an example. 1 million houses, let us assume each flat has only one window. One window. That's 1 million windows.
You've said that that if we're attempting to fight corruption in Nigeria, it's essentially an impossibility if landowners or landlords expect tenants to pay next year's rent in advance, given the salary scales in the country. Now, if you're going to solve that problem, can you get, for example, the National Assembly and state houses of assembly to buy into a solution that would mandate that landlords collect, their rents on a monthly basis as opposed to a yearly basis ahead of time?
Well, first of all, let me pivot back. I'm always very, very careful of what I say. I didn't say that it will be an impossibility if we are going to fight corruption if we do that. What I said, let me say what I said, is that when we ask people to go and bring in advance 2 years of salaries that they have not earned, we must put that in the context of how we aggravate people to take desperate measures. So that's what I said. Now, in answer to your question, the answer will be really and truly how much can the National Assembly as a parliament legislate in terms of private ownership, because supply and demand of housing is an economic matter. And without a doubt, there are deficits. And the pressures are aggravated in the urban centers. That is one of the consequences of urbanization. People moving in search of opportunities. And that's why I make the case that as we begin to progress with agriculture, as we begin to progress with infrastructure, we are taking opportunities from the urban centers back to the rural centers and slowing down the rate of migration. People go back to their farms. People go back to quarries and mines, which are in rural areas, to supply materials to build construction. We tried to intervene in certain number of houses, in certain types of houses in Lagos. But what did we really do? We just said that this is a prescriptive law. If any of you break that law, then you will not be able to come to court to seek relief. Either the tenant that pays more than the prescribed amount, or the landlord that accepts more than the prescribed amount, because then it would be an illegal contract. So it's a self-enforcing law. But ultimately, it is you and I as landlords who must take the first real big step to say, this is really unfair. How can I ask somebody to go and bring what he has not earned? And when he brings it, I don't think that I have done something to push him to desperation. Because if you reduce the number of people who are working and who every year come to beg an uncle, an aunt, a father, a cousin to say, please, my landlord has come, I need 2 years rent. If we release that pressure from this society, we will be a more happier people.
Will there be political will there, though, when you consider that political office holders are many times the landlords and landowners?
I am a minister of government, and those statements that I have made to the public charges everybody to come together to let us do something about it. That is political will.
You know that the problem has never been building houses, and that's one of the reasons why houses were built during Shagari's time and people did not move into them. It's always been putting the houses over the heads of those who really need it, those who can afford to pay for it. What are you doing? I mean, you had a model in Lagos State when you were governor of the state. How is that going to translate, or are you looking at it at all as Minister of Power Works and Housing?
The model that we worked with in Lagos State took us 3 years, the better part of my first term, to finish. Because there's a lot of extensive planning that goes into preparing. When we rolled out, we were then able to roll out 200 apartments every month. And as I said at the time, there was no government on the continent of Africa that was delivering 200 apartments every month. And the plan was for it to build to a sustainability curve, because I think we left about 7,000 units in various stages of construction. It's almost something similar to that we're starting. But mind you, this is a national scale. And that was why at the National Council on Housing and Lands last week in Gombe, one of the things I charged the commissioners who are members of council to do is do something, just start building so that we start reducing the deficit.
How do you hope that people will pay for it?
Mortgages are the best way, and that is an important cultural shift that must happen. Oftentimes, even those who can afford to take mortgages want to pay cash for a house. It's not the way to acquire a house. And those cultural shifts must happen. We must reorientate ourselves to understand that houses are things you pay for through your working life. Slowly, 15, 20, 30 years. And that is what then leads to productivity, because your shelter is tied to your ability to deliver and to keep your job.
So let us also now quickly touch on the Third Mainland Bridge, which was what was played just before we started this conversation. 27 months is what people saw in the papers, and there was a bit of alarm on that. I've been told that we have to quickly take a moment now. I will come back to that question when we come back from this break. Please stay with us.